This is a very, very exciting moment for me because as a ByHeart mom myself, I am so privileged to be speaking with Dr. Devon, who is the Chief Medical Officer at ByHeart. We're going to talk all things formula feeding. She's just a wealth of information. So thank you so much for being here.
Natalia, it is my pleasure, and I can't thank you enough for all that you do for parents, and we are thrilled you're a ByHeart mom, and I'm super excited to talk about your experience and share anything and everything I can about feeding, our formula, bust some myths. We'll get through it all. Awesome.
There's so much to unpack here. I guess the best place to start would just be, tell us a little bit about yourself and, what brought you to ByHeart.
So I am a board certified pediatrician and neonatologist, and a neonatologist is a doctor that takes care of premature and sick infants. And it was really during both of those experiences that I just really became so inspired by nutrition and how much nutrition can really help developmentally. It's not just for growth, it does a lot of really important things for the body. And these sick babies, right, just need nutrition in such a way that we're still trying to understand and figure out. And so I really invested in research in that space and became very passionate about it, and 7 years ago found this company ByHeart that was entering into the infant nutrition space with a very science-led sort of innovative approach, and I immediately became inspired and joined the company as their chief medical officer. And at the company I get to oversee all of our innovation and new products and all of our nutrition and research, as well as our regulatory and safety. So it really was my dream job, and it's inspiring every day to keep feeding babies and keep pushing and doing better and getting to partner with parents to understand infant nutrition.
Yeah, I have to say, when I started doing my own formula research for my two kids, what I learned about ByHeart and the innovation behind it and the lack of innovation in the formula industry in general was just so interesting, and I can't wait to get into more of that. But I am curious, just on a personal note, you said you're a physician and into nutrition, but also a mom. So how has that kind of research and training shaped your personal outlook on feeding?
Natalia, it is such a great question, and I can think back to so many moments as a pediatrician and even a neonatologist when I wasn't a mom, right? And I was so focused on like the nutrition and the science and like explaining all those important things.
Yeah.
And then I became a mom, and I realized it's all about feeding and bonding, and there's so much more than nutrients. It's about mental health and what works for the family. And so, said another way, I think like becoming a parent, before that I was so focused on nutrition, and then after that I learned that babies thriving and parents being supported is what this like nutritional journey is all about. And so it's really given me such a beautiful perspective to zoom out from nutrients when I talk to parents and talk about the baby and the moments and the bonding and how the mom's doing, how the dad's doing, right? Like how feeding's impacting the whole family.
Yeah, I guess the things that can't be measured necessarily, right? That resonates a lot. And the mental health aspect and the stress. I mean, we know that stress has an impact on our bodies, and we know that it affects our kids and all of that. And the kind of standard or go-to messaging has always been breast is best, and that comes with a lot of baggage. And so I wanted to ask you, what your take on that is, and do you have your own slogan, or what would
I kind of do, so I'll bring it in at the end. What I think is unfortunate is breast is best was really a slogan, right, that came about to highlight the unique benefits of breast milk, which at its core is a beautiful sentiment. And I think we're very lucky in the science world to have a blueprint of what are some nutrients we should be designing against in formula. But I think, to your point, unfortunately the slogan itself has started to create a lot of pressure and shaming, especially for parents who can't breastfeed or choose not to breastfeed, and feeding starting to feel like a moral choice as opposed to a practical one, which is just really unfortunate. And so where I really try to show up for parents in these moments is remind them all of those things I was talking about that I gained as a mom, which is feeding's all about bonding, right? When you formula feed, dads and grandparents and everybody else get to like really participate in that bonding experience. And I also think it's really important to remember that formula is nutritionally complete, right? It's highly regulated. There's a very long list. So there is no nutritional deficiency by choosing to formula feed or formula feeding your baby over breastfeeding your baby. And so I think trying to, alleviate some of that guilt and shame and by highlighting some of the benefits of formula, right? And so
Yeah.
I like to say every feeding journey is valid, right?
I love that. That helps a lot. Just a personal story that I'll share because it might help other people is I definitely felt that guilt so much and I was able to breastfeed, but then I went back to work and it's freaking hard, and I was exhausted and my baby was finally sleeping through the night, but I still had to wake up to pump and it was so much and I felt so much guilt stopping when I could have kept going. And that's what led me down this research to kind of justify my own personal need. But for me, like in my situation, once I was able to get over that and not feel guilty, I was just physically, emotionally so much happier and so much better. And I think that really helped my baby too. And I think that both of my kids are, I don't know, I don't think it really made a difference. I think they're both very healthy, wonderful, happy kids.
Of course they are, right? And I think, our hope at ByHeart, right, is empowering parents with the confidence in that, right? That like removing some of that guilt and stress. And I think sometimes that, feeling that it's a lesser sort of food comes into play when you don't understand the foods.
So let's get into the science, which is the
Right.
really, really cool stuff. And that's why I love doing all of these conversations and nerding out. So I guess we should start by laying the foundation about what makes breast milk so unique.
It's a really great question. And, breast milk is the gold standard and it is unique. And I think there's two kind of main reasons. One is that it's dynamic and adaptive. So I think even though, we think about it as a single piece of food, even during a single feed, it starts out with a little more water. So it's really hitting baby's hydration. Towards the end of the feed, it increases in fat content. There are hormones that shift throughout the day, based on your environment or the food you're eating as mom, right? So it's just this dynamic, adaptive food, which, it has some core elements, but then there's some fluctuations in it. So that makes it a little unique. The other thing that it does have are bioactive and immune components, right? And so those are the ones that are doing much more than just growing the baby. They're starting to support development of the baby. And some of those, are unique to breast milk right now, just in sort of what we're able to create from a food technology standpoint. What I love and the greatest part of my job is constantly trying to understand this bioactive component of breast milk and how we can continue to meet those outcomes that we see in breastfed infants for formula fed infants. And so some of them, that have come out in the science that, breastfed infants are, less likely to have atopic disease or asthma later in life, less likely to have metabolic disease or obesity later in life, and may have better cognition, right? These are things that science has said are difference between the two, and this is really speaks to that like bioactive development sort of component of breast milk. But science is advancing, and science is advancing rapidly, and we're starting to understand what those components are, and we're able to start bringing them into infant formula more and more. And so there's this beautiful shift that's been happening over the last decade that ByHeart's gotten to really sort of lead the way on around understanding that formula is not just for growth anymore. It's for growth and development of that baby. And so what's beautiful again about breast milk and its uniqueness is that we can study it and we can learn from it and we can evolve how we're feeding our babies because of it.
It's so cool. I mean, when I was reading about breast milk, I was like, that's pretty amazing that your body can do that and how it knows. But you mentioned, ByHeart as a kind of lead innovator in this space. You guys created this patented protein blend. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Like what's in it? Why is it unique?
I love geeking out on the science too, so I'm always thrilled to get into this. So one of the things I was saying, our goal at ByHeart and how we thought about designing our formula was closing this outcomes gap between breastfed and formula infants. And so a lot of the approach to developing formulas in the past has sort of been like a checklist, right? Like, okay, like they need this to grow, great, check, and there's these things in breast milk, let's just put them in, but not always thinking about the baby and the baby's development beyond growth. And so when we took a look and said, okay, let's look at these things that we're trying to really support development for the baby around, a big component of that are proteins. And proteins really have a lot of this bioactive, sort of what, helping sort of develop the baby component to them. And so it was really important for us to focus there. So our patented protein blend is of 4 sort of different protein sources. The first was alpha-lactalbumin, which is the highest protein in breast milk. And so we knew that was a really important place to start. And so we were able to add alpha-lactalbumin at breast milk levels, which is really exciting for our formula. And then we paired that with another specific protein called lactoferrin, which is also the second most abundant protein in breast milk and also has a lot of these really sort of important bioactive, important for baby's development. So we started with specific formulas, and then from there we said, okay, what else is really, really important to parents is digestion and tolerance. And we know that 75% of babies in this country have formula by 6 months of life. And how are parents communicating with their babies is through their digestion, right? If they're spitting up, if they're having trouble pooping, parents assume that means they're not tolerating their formula. And so it's really important to us to hear that from parents and say, okay, what are components of breast milk that make it easy to digest? And so one of the things we did is in our protein blend, we have broken down proteins. And so breast milk has enzymes that sort of start pre-digesting proteins for babies. So we were able to, in our formulation, pre-digest some of these proteins for babies, sort of mirroring that component of it. And then lastly, we were the first formula company in the US to bring in whole milk as part of our protein blend. And so that brings in really important proteins that are in sort of this complex, this packaging of fats in whole milk, as well as important fats too. But these 4 proteins together really help sort of drive benefits for baby that we've shown in our clinical trial are easy to digest and really start supporting development beyond just growth. So just a whole different lens and like a very cool thing to bring together for babies.
What a time to be alive. I mean, technology is just, in kind of both areas of my work, I'm like talking about tech all day, and it's just incredible. I feel so grateful to be alive right now.
I feel the same way, and it's so fun to watch this develop for our next generation, right? You know, and to have this moment where we're appreciating that food is health and that we can really support babies and that technology is advancing at the same time and science is advancing, and to be able to say, great, let's do this for babies is just, I agree. It's a really exciting time.
It's so cool. You mentioned whole milk, and it seems, you know, from a layman's perspective, pretty obvious to include that. I mean, why wasn't it included before?
Remember, like, babies aren't little adults, right? There's lots of components about their nutrition that is distinctly unique from what we need. So it was so great to be able to work with the FDA and bring this ingredient to infant formula, because I think, like you said, it makes perfect sense. And those fats in whole milk are so important for babies.
I mean, not just babies, right? I grew up in the 90s and it was like diet culture and everything fat free. And now I'm like eating butter and not margarine, you know, like.
No, it is so funny to think back to my childhood diet too. I agree.
Right. It's interesting also, yeah, how perspectives change because of new science. So something else that I've seen a lot on social media is this, not just in formula, the like seed oils, you know, and like the movement against seed oils and why they're so bad. But then I've also read in formula that you need certain oils. Can you kind of like encapsulate that? What is the deal with oils? Why do we need them in formula?
There's a couple things to start at the beginning. One, 50% of babies' calories come from fat, right? That is like huge, right? And you know, the calories from fat are just more than proteins and carbohydrates, as well as fats are really important for brain development. And we know in the first 2 years of life, your brain is like rapidly developing.
Yeah.
And in that too, babies require very different essential fatty acids. So these are fatty acids you must get from your diet, and also a very careful balance of omega-6 and omega-3s. And this is where, you know, the beauty of being able to study breast milk helps us a little bit in that we know a little more about exactly what types of fatty acids baby need to grow. Once you sort of have that as your baseline of fats are really important, they're doing a lot to develop the baby, and we know the profile of what that looks like, the only way to start to achieve that is through combinations of seed oils right now, based on what's recognized as safe to put in infant formula. And so the ingredient selection in the US is really done in partnership with the FDA, where the FDA and companies science. We'll look at ingredients and make sure that they're safe for babies. Because again, babies aren't little adults. Food's a little different. We want to be really thoughtful there. And so the list of ingredients that are available, to create these fats for babies is short-ish, right? Like, I'm not going to say it's short, but it's short-ish. The most exciting and important one was the whole milk that we were able to bring in, right? And then the other ones, you can use coconut oil, you can use rapeseed oil, canola oil, sunflower seed oil, all of those things. And so when we started with our formulation, we were thrilled that we could get some of our fats from our whole milk. But we do have to ensure that babies still have all the fatty acids they need for development. So in that, we very carefully selected our, plant-based or seed oils that we use. And so coconut oil is a tree oil. We use that one. We also do have, rapeseed oil, which is also known as canola oil, because it has a really important omega-6, omega-3 fatty acid profile that babies need. And then sunflower oil is high in oleic and linoleic acid, which are also really important ones for babies. And so it's really thinking about like all of these components, and then you bring all these ingredients together and look at how they all play together. As we're learning things about science and the impact on babies, you can continue to evolve, your fatty acid profile.
Social media is amazing in so many ways. We have more information than ever before, but then it's also, I notice, very black and white and lacking nuance, because you just got to get a message out quick. So this whole fear, there's fear around seed oils and these are bad, but it's not so black and white as you just said. I mean, there's so much more nuance to it.
There really is. And I think the other important part about oils is also how they're processed, right? And so I think and ByHeart works directly with all of our ingredient suppliers, and we've carefully selected them, and in every single ingredient that's in our formula, but especially with our oils. So I think there are also ways that when you're bringing these ingredients, you can be very thoughtful about the partners you're working with. And in dairy, we work directly with our dairy farmers and how they're doing their agricultural practices. So all of these little components are really important too to think about.
Yeah, that's actually a great segue, because I did want to talk about your manufacturing, because when I first learned about that, I was like, that is so cool and also crazy.
I mean, it's wild to think. So we are the first new infant formula manufacturer in over 15 years in this country. And so there were 3 primary manufacturing sites or companies in the U.S. before us that have been operating for decades. And so it's, your bigger Infamils and Similacs, and then this contract manufacturer that's bringing in all the new infant formula manufacturers. When ByHeart was establishing, one thing that was really important to us was transparency with parents, right? And control and ownership. So we bought our first one in 2019. We now have 3 manufacturing facilities. And so much of it was just making sure we could control every single detail of our quality standards, our safety standards, because that's a really big part of commitment to parents, right? And as chief medical officer of the company, oversee safety, right? And for me to be able to say with good conscience to every parent, you can trust this formula. This formula is safe for your baby. I know we conduct thousands of tests through our ingredients and our manufacturing process for every batch to ensure the safety and quality of that. And we're only able to do that because we own our manufacturing. I think also, the ownership was really important to us, especially after the infant formula shortage crisis, that we want to make sure we're reliable for parents, right? That if they start feeding ByHeart to their baby, they know they will have, supply for that entire feeding journey. And so having redundancy by owning 3 manufacturing facilities in our supply chain was really important to us.
Yeah, I'm really interested in that component. It just baffled me that basically most of the formula industry for so long was kind of just white labeling. It surprised me that it hadn't been done in so long. So hats off to you guys. I wanted to also ask you then a little bit about, like we talked about the manufacturing and just the industry in general. You mentioned the formula kind of catastrophe during COVID and, problems with manufacturing and whatnot. And then there were these recent reports that came out that, there's toxins in formula and all these big headlines. But at the end of the day, formula is still an incredibly highly regulated safe industry. So how do we kind of grapple between wanting to make the right choice but still feeling comfortable in the knowledge that the government is doing its job and we we are safe. There's no bad choice, right?
I think, right. First and foremost, I want all parents to hear formulas sold in the US are medically safe and nutritionally complete. There are such strenuous regulations over what is in formula and how formula is manufactured in this country that if it is on the shelf here, or you can purchase it here through a website, that is safe. And I'll kind of rock you through like a few of those steps that sort of provide that assurance. First, there are regulations on what are essential nutrients in infant formula. And so I always tell parents, think about formula as food. It has to have proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. That's important. But it also has to have minerals and vitamins. And it has all of these requirements because it is often the sole source food, right? And so it has to be nutritionally complete. The FDA has a list of 30 ingredients that must be an infant formula that consider it for essential nutrients. And, we're in an exciting moment right now, too, where the FDA is partnering with companies like ByHeart, scientists throughout the world, and double checking that list and making sure it's adequate and has the right science in it. And so it's a really good moment for infant formula to make sure that, we're continuing to evolve. But at its core, that list is safe and complete. And in that, you also, once you design a formula, you must run a study in babies to demonstrate that they will grow and that formula is safe. So every formula that's on the shelf has data and evidence that demonstrates to the FDA that that formula is safe and grows babies in a healthy way. So just like nutritionally, bottom line, all nutrients, all formulas in the US are nutritionally complete. There are also tremendous rigorous manufacturing controls in this country. And the FDA inspects every facility once a year, if not more often. Every batch, especially ByHeart, and I can say this to us because I know them, every batch undergoes testing for safety, consistency, and absence of contaminants. And also, there's nutritional precision in part of this. So every batch also undergoes testing to make sure that the nutrients that are in there are exactly the nutrients that are supposed to be in there. And so the formulation, speaking to the manufacturing piece, is so fun because every batch has to be exact and stable and complete. Mm-hmm. That's an incredible process to develop out. And I'm so thrilled that ByHeart's owned our manufacturing because we've been able to develop that process and all the testing throughout it.
That's really cool. So the FDA is US based, right? Just to clarify for everyone. But then I also see on a lot of formula labels lately, I've been seeing European standards or whatever. And it made me wonder, is European formula, or are their standards better than ours? Are we behind? What's the difference?
It's such a good question. Again, it speaks to sort of, what's being said in social media and
is it marketing?
There are differences. There are definitely differences between the two. At their core, there are not big differences, right? Because at their core, babies need certain things to grow. You need these sorts of proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. The sourcing of those is what can change, right? And that's where ByHeart was able to really distinct ourselves as far as what source of proteins we talked about, where our source of fats came from and things like that. In the US, there's no comments on the source of those ingredients. The only other real difference is that Europe sets a level for DHA. So DHA is a specific fatty acid that is now added to a majority of infant formulas worldwide because it's known to be helpful for brain and eye development. And so there are some differences, but they're very small, and I don't think it should be considered as an indication of quality or an indication of nutritional differences, to be quite honest.
That's really helpful. I guess my takeaway in short is there's a baseline, right? And you're safe. And as for American moms out there, all of these formulas on the shelf are highly regulated and safe. That being said, we can set the bar and we can keep going higher. So we talked about the innovation and what makes ByHeart so unique and different. Other things are your certification. So you're Clean Label Project certified. Tell us a bit about what that means and what also makes you stand out in terms of your safety certifications.
Great. So when we say formula is clean, clean's really important to us, right? And what does that actually mean? And we use it to mean it's the highest standards of safety with carefully chosen ingredients and produced with transparency that we can truly speak to parents about. And so, as I mentioned, throughout our entire testing process, we're constantly testing, to make sure all the nutrients are in there and no contaminants are in there. And we test for over 700 contaminants throughout our process, whether it's ingredients or the formulation. But, as much as we were transparent, we knew the importance of also bringing in an accredited third party. And so years ago, I think when Cleave Label itself was also getting started, we brought them in as part of our process and said, please, we will give you our formula, please test. And they test for over 400 contaminants and do that on an annual basis. So we recertify with them. We have all of their awards for infant formula. So we have their pesticide-free award, their purity award, and their first 1,000-day promise. So, and every time they come out with a new standard, we say, great, we will meet it because we're already testing for all of these things, and we continue to get the awards.
One thing I've noticed also is you're not entirely organic. Why is that? There's some ingredients, right?
Yeah, and so organic is really just a certification around ingredients are grown and produced, right? And so it does, again, it's another sort of third-party accreditation. And while, we choose organic when we can on ingredients that we believe that matters, there's certain of our ingredients that when we're prioritizing the nutritional needs of the baby aren't able to meet U.S. organic standards. And so I think it's also important for parents to recognize European farming practices, which are also very clean, very globally recognized, won't meet U.S. organic standards. And so I think, again, it's just understanding what that certification means and being able to identify ingredients that have similar quality control sort of oversight that can also have that reassurance. And so for ByHeart, I would say organic's important, but it's not the only bar, right? We need to consider all of the other ways that ingredients are manufactured, produced, dairy farming practices, all of those things.
I mean, the biggest reason for me personally to choose organic is, the pesticides and stuff. And you guys have all of those clean certifications. So it's almost like a labeling or just a language difference.
I think it is. I think it's a good point for education with parents, right?
Yeah.
And that I think that certifications provide that assurance. And just like you said, like Clean Label Project to us demonstrates that assurance. I think organic was often sort of the demonstration of farming practices for a very long time. And so I think, it's sort of an evolution of what to look for, or who to partner with, or how to understand the ingredients.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Again, the nuance. It's not black and white. Is there anything coming up next for ByHeart, or what are you really excited about right now? What keeps you
everything.
going?
I'm always excited about everything. I think at ByHeart we prioritize accessibility and innovation. Accessibility comes into assurance of supply. Where you can find us, I'm thrilled to say we're in over 12,000 retail stores now, which is really exciting, as well as on ByHeart.com, as well as on Amazon. And with accessibility too, we also have our Open Hearted program where we partner with communities in food deserts or lower socioeconomic communities where we can provide formula and resources to families in need. And so we've donated over 1 million feeds in that program, which is amazing. And so we will continue to lean into all of that. From an innovation standpoint, as the science continues to emerge, as food tech continues to advance, we're really excited about some of the new ingredients that we're able to bring to babies. And so we will definitely stay on the lookout for soon. I won't say necessarily this year, but soon we'll have some new products out. And then lastly, we always listen to our parents. And so, Natalia, we love people like you that are engaged with ByHeart and ByHeart parents and others that tell us what they need and what will be helpful for them. And so we were really thrilled that the Anywhere pack that we launched earlier this year was really inspired by parents. Parents coming to us and saying, hey, I need to be on the go, or I need, we call it sometimes the grandparent feed, like just make it simpler when they're staying with their grandparents.
Yeah.
And so, that was inspiration we got from parents. And so we always say, please come to us too. We're happy to listen and continue to evolve our packaging, our formula, and everything.
You mentioned two things that for me just blew me away. The Anywhere pack, I used to travel with the canisters of, and like pre-pack the formula. It's like such a simple game changer. And then the other one that was also like a duh moment for me was your packaging. I mean, your actual container or tub, it has the scooper. There's like a little slot for the scooper to go in at the top, so you don't have to dig. I would take chopsticks other times when I used other brands, like take chopsticks and like dig through so I wasn't touching the formula. And it's like so obvious, but so helpful. I don't know why no one else does that.
Thank you so much. And right, I mean, I think it's a lot, one, we're all parents in the company, right? So to your point, here we are like trying to keep it all so clean and then you're expected,
Yeah.
so
It's like
we were thrilled with that. And so that's great to hear that all of those choices are resonating with you and is similarly like to you and all like, please let us know like other thoughts that you're like, hey, could you guys do this? Because
I'll think
we,
about
as an innovative company, we love the challenge, right? And we love hearing what would make parents' lives easier and their feeding experience better. Always happy to hear.
Yeah, I'll have to think about it, but I have to say I have no complaints and I'm just
Amazing.
delighted with those two things in particular.
Amazing.
So I'm a very happy ByHeart mom. So before I let you go, I wanted to do just a fun little rapid fire Mythbusters, if that's cool.
Of course.
Okay, so I just looked up the top not necessarily myths, but the top concerns. I'm going to restate that actually. I looked up the top concerns that people have with formula, and I wanted to see if you could quickly unpack those for us. Okay, the first one, formula has less nutrition than breast milk.
Myth. Definite myth. As I spoke to, there are regulations to ensure the nutrient profile of formula is what a baby needs.
Formula contains harmful fillers or empty calories.
Myth, again, there are tight regulations around what can be in formula and what every single ingredient has met the safety standards of the FDA.
Formula fed babies won't build strong immune systems.
Myth, especially if you have specific ingredients. And so I am proud to say like ByHeart really focused on this. And so those bioactive proteins and important ones can ensure healthy immune development, but also at its baseline, all babies with any appropriate nutrition, which is breast milk or formula, will develop a healthy immune system.
Awesome. How about formula causes obesity later in life? Are there any links there?
This one's myth-ish, and I'll say myth-ish because we know there's evidence that breastfed infants have less obesity later in life. That does not mean formula is causing obesity later in life. This, though, was a very important focus area for ByHeart in that we know that protein overfeeding is probably one of the reasons this does happen or could happen with formula-fed babies. And where you can start to address that concern is with the quality of the proteins that you include.
Very cool.
That one's
Again,
a trickier one, not as quick. That one's a
yeah, the
trickier one.
nuance. No, I love it. Again, nerding out. Formula fed babies are more likely to have allergies.
Again, myth-ish in that breastfed infants have less atopic disease, so allergies, asthma, rhinorrhea, so runny noses and things, than formula-fed babies. We're still truly trying to understand that one as far as what are the components of breastfed infants versus formula-fed that might be driving that. I believe in some of our ingredients, and ByHeart are starting to unpack that, and we have new data coming out addressing this, but that one still, science is still emerging for us on that one.
And formula-fed babies have lower IQs.
Again, these are all the tricky ones. I love it. Now, there's been evidence that breastfed infants will have higher IQs than formula-fed infants at certain time points. But once those babies get later in life, the difference based on nutritional feeding is often washed out. And so that is one that, was important to ByHeart to recognize, and that's why we include all of our whole fats and DHA and important ingredients that we know do help with brain development. I think that that's an interesting one that we'll probably start to see the science evolve over time.
There's probably so much that goes into brain development. I mean, so that you can't even measure that. How are you going to know what caused what?
It's a really one.
There's so much. Okay, Dr. Devon, I cannot thank you enough. This was such a treat and so much fun. I'm eternally grateful for your time with me, but also all that you're doing and all that the team at ByHeart is doing. Like I said, happy ByHeart mom. And so it was just such a privilege to speak with you.
Such a privilege. Thank you for being in the ByHeart family, and we are here for you always, and all of your listeners. I'm always happy to hop back on and answer more questions.
Thank you. Really, really appreciate that, and I know everyone else will. And I will keep following what you guys are up to.